In the summer of 1969, a small spacecraft descended toward a world that had hung above humanity since before there was such a thing as humanity. After eons of myth and imagination, we finally touched the surface of the moon. For a few brief days, we walked, drove, and planted flags on a landscape untouched for billions of years. Half a century later, we're going back. Only this time, we don't plan on leaving. NASA, SpaceX, and a coalition of nations have promised not another visit, but a settlement. A permanent human presence beyond Earth. It sounds ambitious, inspiring even, but there's a problem. Because the moon, as it turns out, isn't just empty, it's hostile. Its dust is razor-sharp and toxic. Its sunlight can boil metal. Its nights are cold enough to freeze steel. Radiation seeps through every molecule. And for half of each month, there's no sunlight, no warmth, and no power. These aren't inconveniences. They're fundamental flaws etched into the moon itself. And despite 50 years of study, billions of dollars, and every ounce of human ingenuity, we still don't have a solution for any of them. So, before we start building cities on the moon, it might be worth asking a simple question. What exactly are we moving into? Because if the moon has taught us anything, it's that it may not be trying to kill us, but it won't make survival easy either. Problem 1. Lunar dust. 4 billion years of meteorite impacts have pulverized the moon's surface into a layer of loose rock and soil. No atmosphere means no weathering, no wind or water to smooth the edges of these particles. Instead, they remain sharp and jagged, like microscopic shards of glass. Under an electron microscope, lunar dust particles look more like medieval weapons than sand grains. The formation process matters here. When a micrometeorite strikes the lunar surface, the energy from the collision is so intense it melts the surrounding material into vapor. That vapor then cools and condenses back onto nearby dust particles, coating them in a glassy shell. Embedded within these shells are tiny specks of metallic iron nanophase iron in their pure phase state. These iron particles give lunar dust two problematic properties. First, they make it magnetic, which is useful if you're trying to filter dust from the air, but concerning if you're trying to understand the full scope of its reactivity. Second, they may contribute to the formation of reactive oxygen species when the dust comes into contact with human tissue. The exact mechanism isn't fully understood, but preliminary studies suggest that this nanophase iron could trigger oxidative stress in cells, leading to inflammation and potential long-term damage. But it gets worse. The moon has no magnetic field, which means the solar wind, a constant stream of charged particles from the sun, strikes the surface directly. This bombardment gives lunar dust a powerful electrostatic charge. During the lunar day, ultraviolet radiation strips electrons from the dust particles. At night, the solar wind bombards them with electrons. The result is dust that behaves less like sand and more like iron filings near a magnet. This static charge is why astronauts struggled so much with dust during Apollo. Brushing it off their suits only made it cling harder. Harrison Schmitt and Gene Cernan, during the final Apollo 17 mission, found that dust had gummed up the joints of their spacesuits so severely they had difficulty moving their arms. The dust was so abrasive it wore through 3 layers of Kevlar-like material on Schmidt's boot in just 3 days. And that's when the symptoms began. Watery eyes, scratchy throats, coughing, nasal congestion. The flight surgeons documented everything, though at the time there wasn't much to be done about it. The missions were short enough that the symptoms would resolve once the astronauts returned to Earth. But what happens during a 6-month mission? Or a permanent lunar base where astronauts are exposed to this dust day after day, month after month? We don't know. Not really. What we do know is troubling enough. When researchers tested lunar regolith simulant on lung cells, they found evidence of inflammation, oxidative stress, and potential cytotoxicity. The sharp edges of the particles can cause mechanical damage to lung tissue. The nanophase iron may generate reactive oxygen species that damage DNA. Prolonged exposure could lead to pulmonary fibrosis, a progressive scarring of lung tissue that reduces oxygen exchange efficiency and has no cure. In 2014, NASA's Lunar Airborne Dust Toxicity Advisory Group, LADTAG for short, released a report recommending a preliminary permissible exposure limit of 0.3 milligrams per cubic meter for a 6-month mission. That's similar to the exposure limit for crystalline quartz, a known carcinogen. It's also worth noting that LADTAG assumed astronauts would only be exposed 5 days per week, which seems optimistic given there's no way to escape lunar dust once it's inside your habitat. The report was based on intratracheal installation studies in rats, essentially. Researchers put pulverized lunar regolith directly into the rat's lungs and measured the response. They found inflammatory changes, lymphoid hyperplasia, and granulomas at moderate doses. At very high doses, there were hints of more severe pathology, though not quite the fibrosis seen in silicosis. At least, that was the idea. But most of these studies used ground-up lunar regolith, not authentic dust from the lunar surface. The milling process might have altered the particle's reactivity. Some researchers believe that dust on the moon is more chemically reactive due to its exposure to radiation and the solar wind, that it has dangling chemical bonds and unsatisfied electron valences that make it more dangerous than anything we can properly simulate on Earth. Dust in joints degrades mobility. Dust in electronics causes overheating and failures. And unlike other engineering challenges, you can't just shield against lunar dust. It's everywhere. Every time an astronaut walks on the surface, they kick up a cloud that takes hours to settle in the moon's weak gravity. Every time they enter a habitat, they bring dust with them. Electrostatic repulsion systems have been tested. Magnetic filters show promise, and advanced coatings might reduce adhesion. But none of these represent a complete solution. On Earth, if you have a dust problem, you sweep. On the moon, sweeping just makes it worse. Problem 2. Radiation exposure. The moon has no magnetic field, no thick atmosphere, nothing to deflect or absorb the constant bombardment of radiation from space. On Earth, we're protected by both. The planet's magnetic field acts like an invisible shield, deflecting charged particles from the solar wind. The atmosphere absorbs most of what gets through. As a result, the average person on Earth receives about 2.4 millisieverts of radiation per year from cosmic sources, roughly 1/6 of total background radiation exposure. On the lunar surface, the numbers are considerably worse. During solar minimum, when the sun's activity is at its lowest, astronauts on the moon can expect to receive about 380 millisieverts per year from galactic cosmic rays alone. That's more than 150 times the cosmic radiation dose on Earth. During solar maximum, when the sun's magnetic field is stronger and deflects more galactic cosmic rays, the dose drops to about 110 millisieverts per year, still 45 times higher than Earth. But that's just the background. The real concern is solar particle events. Occasionally, the sun ejects massive bursts of high-energy protons during solar flares and coronal mass ejections. Most of these events are relatively minor, some are not. In August 1972, between the Apollo 16 and Apollo 17 missions, the sun released a series of intense X-class flares over the course of several days. Had astronauts been on the lunar surface during that storm, they would have received a potentially lethal dose of radiation. It would have caused acute radiation sickness, almost certainly fatal. We got lucky. The storm happened when no one was there. The problem is that solar particle events are unpredictable. We can monitor the sun and get maybe a few hours of warning before a major flare reaches the moon. But that assumes someone is watching, that the communication systems are functioning, that the astronauts have somewhere to shelter. NASA's current radiation limits prohibit increasing an astronaut's lifetime risk of dying from cancer by more than 3%. The agency also has short-term limits, no more than 0.25 Gray equivalent to blood-forming organs within 30 days, and no more than 1.5 Gray equivalent to the skin. Based on historical solar particle events, including the 1972 storm and the October 1989 series, an unshielded astronaut on the lunar surface during a major event could easily exceed these limits. The solution, in theory, is shielding. Build habitats with thick walls. Use lunar regolith to bury modules under several meters of dirt. Keep water tanks between living spaces and the outside. During a solar storm, astronauts retreat to a heavily shielded safe room and wait it out. In practice, none of this is particularly easy. Regolith shielding works, but it requires moving enormous amounts of material. For every square meter of habitat, you'd need tons of regolith piled on top. Robotic systems could handle the work, but they'd need to be operational before astronauts arrive, and they'd need to function reliably in the harsh lunar environment. Water shielding is more compact, but water is heavy. Every kilogram of water you bring from Earth costs thousands of dollars to launch. Extracting water from lunar ice deposits is the obvious alternative, but that technology is still experimental, and even if it works, you're essentially depending on unproven systems to protect astronauts from a threat that could materialize with only hours of warning. Recent measurements from China's Chang'e lander suggest that astronauts on the lunar surface would be exposed to roughly 200 times the radiation levels experienced on Earth. The dosimeter aboard Chang'e, which measured radiation for several months, found that, even with partial shielding similar to what a spacesuit would provide, the dose rate was about 1.4 millisieverts per day. That might not sound like much, but it adds up. A 6-month mission would result in about 250 millisieverts of exposure, which approaches the annual limit for radiation workers on Earth. And that's just from background radiation. Add a solar particle event or two, and you could be looking at career-limiting doses. The longer-term concern is cancer. Ionizing radiation damages DNA. Most of the time, cells can repair that damage. Sometimes they can't, and mutations accumulate. Over years or decades, those mutations can lead to cancer. The exact risk is difficult to quantify because we don't have much data on human exposure to galactic cosmic rays over extended periods. Astronauts on the International Space Station receive some cosmic ray exposure, but they're still partially shielded by Earth's magnetic field. On the Moon, there's no such protection. We fear what we can see: craters, cliffs, the barren grey wasteland stretching to the horizon. But it's the invisible that kills first. Problem 3. Extreme temperature swings. The lunar day lasts about 29.5 Earth days. For roughly 2 weeks, the sun beats down on the surface, heating it to a scorching 127 degrees Celsius, hot enough to boil water. Then, when the sun sets, temperatures plummet to negative 173 degrees Celsius over the course of the next 2 weeks. That's a swing of 300 degrees. For context, the coldest temperature ever recorded on Earth was negative 89 degrees Celsius at Vostok Station in Antarctica. The hottest was 56 degrees Celsius in Death Valley. The Moon's daily temperature swing exceeds the entire range of temperatures naturally occurring anywhere on Earth's surface. Materials don't handle this well. Metals expand when heated and contract when cooled. Do this repeatedly over hundreds or thousands of cycles, and eventually they develop stress fractures. Seals lose their integrity. Joints stiffen or fail. Electronics, designed to operate within a certain temperature range, suddenly find themselves outside it. Transistors that worked fine at room temperature behave unpredictably at negative 173 degrees. Even worse, the dust expands and contracts along with everything else. During experiments simulating lunar temperature cycles under vacuum conditions, researchers found that rocks subjected to these temperature swings developed cracks over time. The rate of cracking was lower than in previous studies conducted in nitrogen atmospheres, suggesting earlier work may have overestimated thermal fatigue, but the cracking still occurred. Different rock types fractured differently under these conditions, meaning dust behavior varies by region. NASA and its partners are developing thermal management systems that can handle these extremes: radiators that efficiently dump heat during the scorching day, insulation that retains warmth during the freezing night, heaters that keep critical systems operational when external temperatures drop low enough to freeze carbon dioxide. But these are active systems, requiring power and maintenance. They represent additional points of failure in an environment where failure isn't just inconvenient, it's lethal. Every sunrise on the Moon is a furnace, every sunset a freezer. The surface is trying to kill you every 12 hours. Problem 4, the lunar night. For 2 weeks, the sun disappears. Not gradually, the way it does on Earth, where twilight lingers and the atmosphere scatters light across the sky. On the Moon, when the sun sets, darkness falls like a curtain. No atmosphere means no scattered light. Stars and Earth provide some illumination, but not nearly enough to see by. For 14 days, the surface is plunged into a cold, absolute darkness. This presents an immediate problem. Solar power doesn't work. Most spacecraft rely on solar panels to generate electricity. On the Moon, those panels are useless for half of each month. During the Apollo missions, this wasn't a concern. The astronauts were only there for a few days at a time, and their lunar module ran on batteries and fuel cells. But for a permanent base, or even a multi-month mission, you need a power source that functions during the lunar night. Nuclear fission reactors can provide steady power regardless of whether the sun is shining, but they're heavy, expensive, and politically complicated. NASA has been developing a small fission reactor called kilopower, designed to produce up to 10 kilowatts of electricity for lunar or Martian applications. It works, in principle, but it's not flight-ready, and even when it is, 10 kilowatts isn't a lot for a full-scale lunar base. Batteries are the obvious alternative. Charge them during the day, drain them at night. The problem is energy density. Current lithium-ion batteries would need to be enormous to store 2 weeks' worth of power for even a modestly sized habitat. And batteries don't perform well at low temperatures. Below about -40 degrees Celsius, most batteries lose significant capacity or stop working altogether. Researchers are exploring advanced battery chemistries that might fare better in extreme cold, but these are still experimental. Hydrogen fuel cells are another option. Produce hydrogen and oxygen from water ice during the day, recombine them at night to generate electricity and heat. But this requires a working water extraction system, which, again, is unproven technology. Electronics not actively heated will cool to the ambient temperature somewhere around -150 to -170 degrees Celsius, depending on location. Many electronic components aren't rated for those temperatures. Transistors behave unpredictably. Lubricants freeze solid. Seals become brittle. Japan's slim lander managed to survive 3 lunar nights by shutting down into a hibernation state and hoping its batteries stayed warm enough to restart once the sun came up. That's impressive from an engineering standpoint, but it's hardly a long-term solution. You can't run a lunar base by shutting everything down every 2 weeks. NASA has identified surviving the lunar night as one of the top technical challenges for sustained presence on the Moon. Not just keeping systems alive, but maintaining operational capability. The difference between hunkering down for 2 weeks and continuing normal activities is the difference between visiting the Moon and living there. And here's the thing about the lunar night. It's not just dark and cold. It's isolating in a way that's difficult to convey. When the sun sets, you're not just losing light and heat, you're losing contact with Earth, at least partially, because solar panels on communication relays stop working. You're losing the ability to recharge, to move around safely, to conduct any surface operations that require visibility. Problem 5. Communication and autonomy. The Moon is tidally locked with Earth. One side, the near side, perpetually faces our planet. The other side, the far side, always faces away. This creates an interesting problem for lunar missions. Anything operating on the far side of the Moon has no direct line of sight to Earth. Radio signals can't pass through 3,400 kilometers of solid rock, which means that to communicate with rovers, landers, or astronauts on the far side, you need relay satellites in lunar orbit. NASA and other space agencies are already planning to deploy communication satellites around the Moon as part of the Artemis program. The Lunar Gateway Station will provide some relay capability, and dedicated communication satellites will fill in the gaps. But here's where it gets complicated. Even with perfect communication infrastructure, there's still a delay. Light takes about 1.3 seconds to travel from the Moon to Earth. That means any signal sent from the lunar surface takes 1.3 seconds to reach Earth, and any response takes another 1.3 seconds to return. That's a 2.6-second round-trip delay at minimum. For casual communication, that's fine. For teleoperated robots, it's a problem. You can't drive a rover in real time with a multi-second lag. By the time you see an obstacle and tell the rover to stop, it's already driven into it. This means lunar systems need to operate autonomously, not just following pre-programmed instructions, but making decisions on their own. Navigation, obstacle avoidance, task prioritization, error recovery, all of it has to happen without human intervention. Autonomous systems exist, of course. Mars rovers like Curiosity and Perseverance operate with similar constraints due to the much longer communication delay with Mars. But autonomy is hard. It requires sophisticated software, extensive testing, and even then, things go wrong. A rover gets stuck, a sensor malfunctions, an unexpected situation arises that the programming didn't account for. On Mars, when something goes wrong, engineers on Earth spend days or weeks figuring out a solution and uploading new commands. On the Moon, the expectation is that systems will be more responsive, more capable, more resilient, because the Moon is close enough that we should be able to fix problems quickly. Except we can't. Not if the problem is on the far side, not if it happens during the lunar night when power is limited and communication windows are narrow, not if it involves something that requires a human to physically intervene. For crewed missions, the autonomy requirement extends beyond robots. Life support systems, power generation, thermal management, radiation monitoring, all of it needs to function reliably with minimal oversight. Astronauts can't be constantly troubleshooting equipment failures. They have work to do, experiments to conduct, construction projects to complete. The more complex the systems, the more things that can go wrong. And the more autonomous those systems are, the less control humans have when something does go wrong. There's a loneliness to this that's worth acknowledging. For the first time in human spaceflight, astronauts on the far side of the Moon will be truly out of reach. When Apollo astronauts orbited the Moon, passing behind it meant a temporary loss of communication, 30 or 40 minutes of silence before they re-emerged on the near side. It was unsettling, but brief. On the far side of the Moon, Earth isn't hanging in your sky. For the first time, we won't just be far from home, we'll be out of reach. We like to imagine that every problem has a solution, that sufficient ingenuity, enough time, adequate resources, these things can overcome any obstacle. It's a comforting belief. And often, it's even true. But the Moon doesn't care about our ingenuity. Lunar dust has been grinding down rocks for 4 billion years. It will continue grinding them down long after we're gone. The solar wind has been bombarding the surface with radiation since the Moon formed. Temperature swings have been cracking and reshaping the regolith through countless cycles of heating and cooling. None of these are problems for the Moon. They're only problems for us. NASA, ESA, private companies, they're all working on solutions. Electrodynamic dust shields that repel particles using electric fields. Magnetic filters that pull nanophase ion from the air. Thermal coatings inspired by the lotus leaf effect, reducing dust adhesion. Autonomous systems with sophisticated AI. Nuclear reactors the size of garbage cans. Habitats buried under meters of regolith. Some of these will work. Many already do, to an extent. But every solution reveals new complications. Electrostatic shields require power, which means more solar panels, which means more surface area for dust to accumulate on. Magnetic filters capture iron-rich particles, but do nothing about the rest of the dust, and they need regular cleaning, which exposes workers to more dust. Autonomous systems can make decisions, but they can't improvise the way humans can, and they certainly can't fix themselves when something breaks. The truth is that we're not solving these problems so much as managing them, finding ways to reduce exposure, mitigate risks, buy ourselves a little more time before something critical fails. That might be enough for short missions, weeks or months at a time. But for permanent habitation, for the vision of lunar bases and off-world industry and humanity spreading beyond Earth, the Moon isn't cruel. It simply doesn't care. There's a certain humility in that realization. We've been to the Moon before, but we were visitors, brief ones. Now we're trying to move in, to establish ourselves as residents, and the Moon is reminding us that this isn't our environment. We're adapted for Earth for breathable air and magnetic shielding and liquid water and day-night cycles that last hours instead of weeks. Every system we bring to the Moon is a piece of Earth we're trying to preserve in a place that has no interest in preserving it. Maybe that's the real fatal flaw. Not the dust or the radiation or the cold or the darkness, but our assumption that these are problems with solutions. That given enough time and money and effort, we can engineer our way into making the Moon habitable. Perhaps some flaws aren't meant to be solved. Perhaps some environments are hostile not because they're broken, but because they were never designed for life in the first place. And perhaps the question isn't whether we can overcome the moon's hostility, but whether we should. Every footprint we leave on the lunar surface stirs a cloud of dust that takes hours to settle in the weak gravity. It clings to our boots, our suits, our equipment. It gets tracked into habitats where it floats in the air, too small to see but large enough to irritate lungs and damage machinery. We brush it off, filter it out, seal it away, but it always finds a way back in. Dust on the moon doesn't settle the way it does on Earth. It lingers, it accumulates. It reminds us, with every step, that this place is not ours. Maybe one day, we'll find better ways to cope with it. Better filters, better materials, better understanding of how to coexist with lunar regolith. Maybe advances in nanotechnology or materials science will give us tools we can't even imagine yet. Maybe the children of the first lunar colonists will adapt in ways we can't predict, developing technologies and techniques that make living on the moon as routine as living in Antarctica is today. Or maybe, decades from now, we'll look back at our lunar ambitions, the way we look back at so many grand projects, necessary stepping stones, important learning experiences, but ultimately temporary. Maybe the moon will remain what it's always been, a place we visit, study, and admire from afar. For now, we press forward. We build our landers and test our habitats and train our astronauts. We develop countermeasures and contingency plans and backup systems for our backup systems. We do this because we're explorers, because we're curious, because the unknown has always called to us, even when it promised nothing but hardship. But let's be honest about what we're doing. We're not conquering the moon. We're negotiating with it, asking it, politely, to let us stay for a while, hoping it doesn't notice us too much. Every now and then, when the dust settles just right, and the earth hangs in the black sky, and the stars stretch out forever in every direction, we might catch a glimpse of what drew us here in the first place. The wonder of it, the sheer audacity of standing on another world. And then we'll go back inside, seal the airlock, and spend the next hour trying to get the dust out of our equipment. Because that's what living on the moon means. Not triumph, not conquest, just endurance, one dust particle at a time.